Right, so this year's World Environment Day is being celebrated under the theme Ecosystem Restoration. And this is to increase awareness on the impact and the risks damaged ecosystems pose to our survival and the solutions that are available. Now, when the world was tackling COVID-19 last year, there was a minor moment of euphoria when people began working from home and pollution levels apparently dropped. Things quickly went back to the status quo and the lockdowns were lifted. Let's bring in a better mind. The climate change specialist, Prof Stephanie Midgley, joins us now live to talk all things environment. Professor, pleasure having you on the program. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Good morning to the viewers.
You know, we were just talking about when many countries went into this hard lockdown. I think it was 2 years ago, I was in Venice, Italy, and took notice of the water condition there. And then you saw, post the lockdown, how clear everything was. Direct impact of the pandemic on the environment. What else did we see in terms of that?
Yes, I think you're absolutely right. There were areas where water quality suddenly became wonderful, and people were almost euphoric that we're back to a normal situation. But unfortunately, that was very short-lived. And as economic activity, came back to normal, we saw the pollution coming back, and not only water but also air quality. There were areas, I think, there were astounding pictures from parts of Asia, for example, in India, where suddenly, large cities that never see their surrounding mountains could suddenly see everything clearly. But that really only lasted a few months. And as soon as activity started again, unfortunately, the pollution came back.
Look, I want to just talk about some of the lessons that we can learn from seeing what we saw a year ago. What would you say the world can learn in terms of improving certain aspects of the environment?
Well, I think the pandemic has shown us that we actually have a really wonderful opportunity now to build back better, if you want to call it like that. So we've seen now what is possible when you reduce the use of fossil fuels. And that is really at the nub of it. We have to make more progress in reducing our dependency on fossil fuels and moving to clean fuels and renewable fuels. And so that really showed us the urgency of and the opportunity that we have now when so much investment is being pumped into the recovery after COVID, that we use that investment towards what we call the green economy and stimulating technologies and practices that get us into a long-term situation where we have a cleaner environment, both water and air quality and other aspects.
Prof, the Paris Agreement goal is to limit global warming to well below 2, preferably I think it is 1.5 degrees Celsius compared to pre-industrial levels. Are emissions being reduced at a rate that science says we need to?
Yes, the science is very clear. The science shows clearly what pathway we should be on now to reach that 1.5 degrees or at a maximum below 2 degrees Celsius. And we need to listen to the science, and we need to really start taking actions in terms of the pledges that governments are submitting internationally as to what they propose, how their emission reductions are going to play out. And the pledges at the moment are really not sufficient. Some countries have increased their commitments recently. South Africa is in the process of looking at their commitment. But at the moment, if we look at all the commitments combined, we are not even on track for 2 degrees Celsius. We would be very lucky to reach or to stay under 2 degrees, never mind 1.5. So, and it's really, really important that we still aim for 1.5 degrees Celsius, even though it looks at this point like it's not achievable. But in fact, there are many climatologists, many scientists in this field who are saying it is achievable, but we must have the political will to actually do that now.
So let's talk consequences of not achieving that goal. What's research telling us? Are climate change impacts intensifying? And if so, give us some examples, some practical examples that we can relate to.
Yes, so climate change is across the world intensifying climate threats or extreme weather events. We see that absolutely everywhere. And in South Africa, we've seen it, for example, across the country, more heavy rainfall. So, we do see heavier rainfall towards the end of summer, for example, in the summer rainfall regions. So climate change is increasing the threat of those kinds of events happening, really daily heavy rainfall leading to flooding. And we're seeing that across other parts of the world as well. And then, of course, we're seeing dry spells, areas that are prone to times of drought or dry spells. We're seeing the probability or the frequency and the intensity and also the length of those dry spells, like we saw in the Western Cape recently, is increasing. So, and those are just two examples. There are many other examples: sea level rise and others, heat, very, very hot days that are a threat to humans and animals and ecosystems. And so we are definitely seeing those changes taking place, and the impacts can already be seen. They're felt by, I think, most people, people who are, for example, farmers. I work a lot with farmers, and everybody is saying they're feeling it. The variability of how the rainfall falls, the temperatures, just everything has become so unpredictable, and the impacts could be quite severe in South Africa. So if we don't remain under 2 degrees Celsius, the impacts on South Africa could be quite devastating, in fact, and the science shows that.
Yeah. The aim, I guess, is to create this low-carbon, climate-resilient economy. One would say easier said than done. Adequate finance is needed. Technology, capacity building, mitigation is required. Give us a sense from your perspective. What are some of the hurdles we need to jump over in order to get that resilient economy in an environment that allows it to thrive?
In my view, yes, we do need technologies. We absolutely need finance, and I don't want to downplay that. But I think first and foremost for me is the will, the understanding by people with decision-making powers, people who have control over budgets, budget processes, to really take this extremely seriously. And I think once the political will is there, and also the will from consumers, when they start understanding what the consequences could be for themselves, for their communities, for jobs, for economic sectors. Once I think everybody has agreed that we need to tackle this together, and also together with other countries, then I think all the other things will fall into place. Because there are resources available. There is finance available. I mean, there's so many countries still giving massive subsidies to the fossil fuel industry. If those were diverted to financing adaptation or mitigation, we could get to the target of 1.5 Celsius. Well, I think, yes, many of the technologies are already available. They are already being rolled out, but we just need it at much greater scale. So we need investment to be channeled through to those technologies. And of course, there will be new technologies that need to be developed as we go along. And not just in mitigation of the emissions, but also in adaptation. We need a lot more financing on adaptation, also in South Africa.
Well, let's talk about adaptation. South Africa's national climate change adaptation strategy, I understand, has been approved, and the strategy defines the country's vulnerabilities, plans to reduce those vulnerabilities, and I guess one would say leverage some opportunities in this regard. It's seen as a common reference point for climate change adaptation efforts in South Africa. But what's your take on this, Prof? What should be the short to medium-term goals with regards to this plan?
So the adaptation strategy sets it out very clearly. It's a strong document. It was developed with much consultation across the country. And it really looks also at the timescales of what is really, really urgent and what is more medium term and what is the longer term adaptation goal. And I think it's really, really important that we look at those short-term goals and we start taking action. And the strategy focuses very much on the most vulnerable sectors to start with. And I mean, we all, I think, recognize that water is probably the most important one. We need to take action to, build, maintain, restore our water infrastructure. We need to analyze whether we need more water infrastructure in certain areas. We need to just become much more efficient with the way we use water, reducing losses, so on. The other sectors which are vulnerable are, of course, farming. Everybody knows that climate and disasters affect farming directly. And there's some very good approaches also in the strategy to helping farmers, building up the health of the soil, planting the right crops, using the right breeds of livestock that are resilient, and so on. And those are things, some of those things can be done in the next 5 years and should be done. And then some things, for example, breeding programs, water infrastructure planning and financing, so on, will take maybe 20, 30 years. But we need to start even on those things that we will need by 2050 or by 2060.
if I can remember correctly, finalizing that Paris Agreement on climate change wasn't an easy task, from verb tenses to deals being cut, no small feat. But in the end, I think over 100 countries were brought into the accord. But some of the terms we use when we talk about climate change can often fly over our heads. I know it does on mine. But what can we do practically? What can I do? What can those who are watching do on an everyday basis to help mitigate some of the effects?
I think there are two parts to that answer. And the first part is that we are personally requested, and it's demanded of us personally, to change behaviors. That is within our means, obviously. Not everybody has certain resources available to them, but whatever is in our means, to reduce our carbon footprint, to work much more efficiently with the water we have, to not destroy our environment, look after our river systems in our communities, make sure they're not polluted. So, there are many, many things that individuals can do. And then, of course, many people are saying that globally there's a real need to start changing our food system, looking at what we eat, how much we eat of, food sources that maybe are very heavy on emissions, for example, some of the livestock sector. But there are ways as well, even there, to change and adapt in a way that doesn't mean we have to stop eating certain things. But we need to look at that. I think the other part of it is beyond our personal responsibility. We have agency through our vote to put pressure on our politicians and decision makers to say this is really a big problem for us. It's a problem for the next generation. It already affects economic sectors and job creation potential in some areas. So putting pressure on our representatives to say, please take this seriously, please represent us in making sure that more progress is made in this direction.
Sometimes it's the little things that we do that make the greatest impact in the long run. Professor, we thank you very much indeed for coming on, giving us a perspective, practical answers as well, and what we can do in order to get to a better place, I guess. Appreciate your time. God bless. Be well.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
All right, that was climate change specialist Professor Stephanie Midgley there, giving us her take with regards to where we are in this discussion around climate change, and particularly here in South Africa.